Miss Eleanor Reed had long believed she'd seen every shade of child walk through her classroom door: rebellious ones, brilliant ones, troubled souls, and shining stars. But nothing prepared her for the quiet boy who stepped in one chilly Wednesday morning. He carried no backpack, spoke little, and his eyes, they held a sadness no 10-year-old should know. She offered him a seat. She offered him a biscuit. But what she received in return was something far beyond explanation. You're watching Storytelling and Beyond, the channel where ordinary moments unfold into extraordinary tales. If you're moved by stories of mystery, compassion, and emotional twists that tug at the soul, please subscribe, like, and click the bell icon so you never miss a story that could stay with you forever. The small village of Windmere on Avon had a charm that clung to every cobblestone and hedge-lined footpath. Its primary school, Ashgrove, was tucked between a sleepy chapel and a crooked bakery that smelled of warm scones by noon. And in room 4B, Miss Eleanor Reed began her day like she had for the past 19 years, with a smile, a tidy cardigan, and the smell of chalk lingering on her sleeves. At 9:02 a.m., as she took attendance with the comforting rhythm of familiarity, Lily? Oliver? Thomas? The door creaked open. Standing in the frame was Headmaster Gerald Bancroft, mustached and mildly breathless. Beside him stood a boy Eleanor had never seen before. "Miss Reed," the headmaster said, adjusting his tie, "this is Arthur. He'll be joining us in 4B for the foreseeable future." The boy was pale, almost ghostly, with thin wrists, much dark hair, and shoes that had seen better days. He clutched a small, aged notebook to his chest. No backpack. No lunchbox. Just the notebook. And his eyes were the sort of deep that made you feel like you were looking into something old and lost. "Welcome, Arthur," Miss Reed said, gesturing toward the only empty seat near the windows. "You may sit next to Lily." He moved quietly, almost floaty, as if his feet barely touched the ground. The rest of the children, who moments ago had been whispering and giggling through attendance, now sat unusually still, stealing glances at the newcomer. No one snickered. No one nudged their neighbor. It was as if Arthur's presence hushed the air itself. Miss Reed resumed the lesson, fractions and division, nothing extraordinary, but something nagged at her. Arthur didn't raise his hand. Didn't scribble on the worksheet she had given. Instead, he simply watched. Not with curiosity, but with knowing. A knowing that unsettled her. At break, Eleanor noticed Arthur hadn't gone out to the field with the others. She found him sitting on the edge of the classroom windowsill, looking out toward the line of trees that framed the far end of the playground. His small fingers traced circles on the window glass. "You all right, Arthur?" she asked softly. He turned, those haunting eyes fixing on hers. "Yes, Mississippi." "Not hungry?" He shrugged. "I'm used to waiting." Eleanor frowned and reached into her drawer. She kept a small tin of biscuits for particularly dreary days. Selecting a shortbread, she handed it to him. No one should wait on an empty stomach. He accepted it, but made no move to eat. Eleanor sat down on the small chair beside him. The silence between them was soft, not awkward. Just quiet. Then Arthur broke it. "Do you believe in people coming back?" She blinked. "Coming back?" "From somewhere," he said, eyes returning to the trees. "Even if it's been a long time." "Do you mean someone who's gone away?" she asked, cautiously. He didn't answer. Just nibbled at the edge of the biscuit, crumbs gathering silently on his notebook. Miss Reed's chest tightened inexplicably. Something in his tone, that strange calm, it stirred something she had buried long ago. That night, back in her ivy-covered cottage, Eleanor prepared her usual supper: tea, toast, and a bit of marmalade. But she wasn't hungry. Instead, she found herself by the fireplace, an old photo album spread across her knees. She turned to a page marked by time, a snapshot of two children under a willow tree, herself and her younger brother, Henry. He had vanished when? The days that followed Arthur's arrival were unusually still, like the air itself paused when he walked in. He never arrived with the other children. Instead, Miss Reed would find him already seated quietly at his desk when she unlocked the classroom each morning, that same worn notebook resting like a sacred object on the edge of his table. No one saw him enter. No child claimed to walk with him. And when asked directly, Arthur would simply tilt his head with a small smile, saying nothing at all. Despite the mystery, he wasn't disruptive. In fact, quite the opposite. He listened with such intensity it unnerved even the most talkative children. When Eleanor read aloud from The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, Arthur's eyes closed, not in boredom, but as though he were walking through the story in his mind. Sometimes his lips would move slightly, repeating lines under his breath a second after she spoke them. One morning during spelling, Eleanor walked past his desk to find his notebook open, not with spelling words, but sketches. Detailed pencil drawings of old keys, tall trees with initials carved into them, and once, strangely, a drawing of a little boy standing in front of what looked like Ashgrove Primary, only older, aged by decades, as if seen through time. "Arthur," she said gently, "this is quite good. Do you like drawing?" He looked up at her, the shadow of a grin appearing. "Sometimes," he replied. "When I remember things." She frowned. "Remember? These aren't memories, surely?" He didn't respond, only closed the notebook and tucked it into his jumper, eyes returning to the board. That same afternoon, the class was assigned a group project. Arthur was placed with Lily and Daniel, both kind, bright children Eleanor trusted. As they began their task of designing a dream school, Lily offered her idea of a rainbow slide from the library to the playground. Daniel wanted a swimming pool under the gym. Arthur said nothing. Just drew silently while they chattered. When they finally looked at what he'd sketched, the talking stopped. His drawing showed a different school, one with gray brick walls and ivy crawling up the side. Not a dream school. An old one. A school that looked eerily like Ashgrove, but older. Darker. There was even a plaque with the date carved into it, Ashgrove School for Orphan Boys, 1908. Miss Reed saw their puzzled expressions and walked over. The moment her eyes landed on the sketch, her breath caught. That name. Orphaned Boys. Ashgrove hadn't always been a primary school. She'd heard the stories, years ago, buried beneath village whispers and half-forgotten local history. Long before it was converted in the 1970s, the building had once been a home for boys who had nowhere else to go. Most of those records were lost in a fire, or so they said. But how did Arthur know? "Where did you hear about that?" she asked, her voice low, almost afraid of the answer. Arthur looked at her directly for the first time that week. "It's where I lived before," he said softly. "When the windows were smaller. And the trees weren't there yet." The classroom buzz fell away. The air grew thick. Eleanor stared at him, words failing her. Before she could speak, the bell rang. Children bolted from their chairs, eager for lunch and playground laughter. But Arthur remained seated, quietly closing his sketchbook. Eleanor placed a hand on the back of her chair for balance, heart ticking too fast. That evening, she stayed behind after the halls emptied out. She pulled out old records from the staff cupboard, the ones even the headmaster rarely touched. After an hour of flipping through brittle papers and dusty folders, she found it. An article from the Windermere Gazette. Yellowed and curled at the edges. Local orphanage closes doors after 70 years, fire claims archives, for boys missing, presumed dead. A grainy photo accompanied it. Blurred figures stood outside what was unmistakably Ashgrove's front entrance. One boy, in the very center, stared directly at the camera. The resemblance was undeniable. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she traced the face. Arthur. Or someone who looked exactly like him. Outside, wind danced against the glass, and in the far corner of the classroom, a single sheet of paper fluttered to the floor, from Arthur's desk. A drawing of the school in flames. And beneath it, in neat handwriting. Some stories don't end. They wait. The next morning, Eleanor Reed awoke before the alarm. Not with energy, but with a gnawing unease. She sat on the edge of her bed, clutching a photograph from the article she had discovered. Its crinkled corner now bent and soft from being held too long. It wasn't just the resemblance. It was the eyes. She'd seen them yesterday and 30 years ago. She drove to school in silence, skipping her usual stop at the village cafe. Her coffee remained untouched in the passenger seat. Something about that drawing, the school engulfed in flames, wouldn't leave her mind. When she arrived, Arthur was, once again, already seated. But this time, something was different. He was wearing a navy coat with brass buttons that didn't quite fit in with modern styles. The rest of the class hadn't yet filed in. Eleanor approached slowly. "Arthur," she said softly. "Can I see your sketchbook again?" He looked up, his face unreadable. "Why?" I need to understand," she replied, kneeling beside his desk. He reached into his satchel and handed it over without a word. She flipped through it, pages of buildings, trees, and faces. One in particular stopped her heart. A young woman standing beside an old fireplace. Hair pinned up. Skirt just touching her shoes. It was Eleanor herself, only younger. Not drawn as she looked now, but as she appeared in an old photo that sat on her grandmother's piano for years. She hadn't looked like that in decades. Her voice barely a whisper, she asked, "How did you draw this?" Arthur was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I don't always draw what I see. Sometimes I draw what I remember." She stared at him. "Have we met before?" "Yes," he replied, without blinking. "But you were smaller then. I watched you put violets by the tree when you thought no one could see." She recoiled slightly. "The oak tree?" He nodded. "For your brother." The room spun. That memory wasn't one she had ever shared. At 7, after her brother's disappearance, Eleanor would sneak away from class during lunch and leave flowers at the base of the old oak near the edge of the field. Violets, his favorite. She had never told a soul. "Who are you?" she breathed, her mouth dry. But before Arthur could answer, the bell rang and students flooded in. Eleanor taught in a daze that morning, stumbling through math and struggling with her focus. Arthur was quiet as ever, but his presence now loomed larger than life. At break time, he was gone. She checked the toilets. The office. Even outside behind the shed. He had vanished. Until she heard a faint sound from the attic above the gym, an old storage space no longer used since the refurbishment. Following instinct more than logic, Eleanor grabbed the old metal key from the caretaker's drawer and climbed the narrow staircase. The door creaked as she opened it. Dust floated like mist in the beams of sunlight cutting through slits in the tiles. Stacked chairs. Old projectors. A dusty globe. And in the middle of the room, Arthur sat cross-legged on the floor, sketchbook in his lap, candlelight flickering beside him. She stepped in, closing the door behind her. "Arthur, why are you here?" He didn't look up. "I remember this place," he murmured. "This is where we hid when the fire started." Eleanor moved closer. "What fire?" "The one no one could stop. The night the matron locked the doors. Not out of cruelty, but fear. She thought she was protecting us." He turned a page in the book. A vivid drawing of 4 boys, huddled together, smoke curling around them. In the background, a woman in old-fashioned clothes crying behind a locked door. "We didn't all make it out," he said quietly. Eleanor's throat tightened. Are you saying you were one of those boys?" Arthur looked up at her, and for the first time, his voice trembled. "I don't know what I am anymore. But I remember you." A girl with sad eyes and violets in her pocket. Tears sprang to Eleanor's eyes. "Why are you here?" she asked. He looked at her, expression soft. "Because not all stories finish when people think they do. Some return to the people who cared, even when they were too small to help." The candle flickered wildly. And suddenly, the air smelled faintly of smoke. The attic was heavy with silence, the kind that sinks into your skin. Eleanor stood, her hand loosely gripping the back of an old wooden chair, eyes fixed on Arthur. The boy, if that's truly what he was, sat perfectly still beside the dying flame of the candle. His sketchbook now lay open between them, its latest page still unfinished. The outline showed a school bell swinging midair, with shadowed children running beneath it, faces turned upward in alarm. Eleanor took a careful breath. "What do you want me to do?" Arthur looked up slowly. "I want you to remember." "Remember what?" He motioned to the corner of the room. She turned. There, half covered by a moth-eaten sheet, stood an old-school trunk. The kind used decades ago, with brass hinges and a leather handle. Eleanor hadn't seen it in years. She didn't even recall it being in the attic. Compelled more than convinced, she knelt and flipped the lid open. Inside were books, chalk slates, and a faded blue jumper. Folded neatly beneath it, a thin red notebook. She pulled it out carefully. Her initials were scrawled on the cover in shaky childlike writing. Her heart skipped. She opened it and the memory hit like a wave. The final entry, written in uneven cursive, read: "I saw him again by the tree. He waved at me. No one believes me. But I know it was Jamie. Jamie. Her brother. The one who vanished after school one gray afternoon while waiting for her by the back gate. No one ever found him. Only his cap, caught on a bush, and her own memory of his last wave." Her knees gave out slightly as she sat back on her heels, notebook still in hand. She looked at Arthur. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you never stopped looking for him," he replied. "Not really. You became a teacher. You searched in every face." Her eyes welled. "But what does that mean? Why now?" Arthur's voice softened. "Because someone finally heard me." Before she could ask what he meant, the candle beside him flickered violently. A gust of air swept through the attic though no window was open. The shadows seemed to ripple. And then she heard it. A boy's laughter, distant, echoing. Soft and familiar. So familiar. "Jamie," she whispered. Arthur gave her a knowing smile. "I think it's time you forgave yourself." Tears streamed freely now, her throat closing. "Are you, him?" Arthur didn't answer. He stood slowly and placed a hand over the red notebook. "I'm someone who remembers. That's enough." And just like that, the candle extinguished. Darkness swallowed the attic for the briefest second until the sun pierced again through a crack in the roof. When she opened her eyes fully, Arthur was gone. Only the sketchbook remained, lying open. Its final drawing was a scene under the oak tree, two children, a boy and a girl, placing violets on the ground. Behind them, in faint lines, stood a figure, watching, smiling. Eleanor pressed the notebook to her chest. The next day, when the headmaster asked about the new student, she stared at him blankly. "Arthur," she said. "I don't think we have an Arthur enrolled." He raised a brow. "Strange. The name came up on the register Monday. But I checked the database, no record now. Must have been an error." Eleanor only smiled, the red notebook tucked under her arm. And outside, beneath the old oak tree, the spring violets were blooming again, for the first time in years. You've been watching Storytelling and Beyond, where forgotten memories find their way back, and ordinary lives are touched by the extraordinary. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. There's always more than meets the eye, and more stories just waiting to be told.